in that regard. And if we can identify a mutation or series of mutations that predispose to this, that becomes a crack in the door, because genes make proteins, and proteins help you understand what the process is that's deranged, and then you can begin to to make studies on it. The other route, which is similar, this has to do more with my own research. I'm collaborating with a couple of other individuals in an international project where we think we've actually identified a unique biomarker for lipedema in the blood, and we're just validating that now. And if that's true, then we can begin to study what the function of that. In addition to using it for diagnostic purposes, now we go beyond the stage of, oh gee, you're telling me you have a disease, but I just see you as, like my other overweight patients. If we have a biomarker and you think you have lipedema, then you can have a blood test ultimately, and we say yes, it is lipedema, or no, it's not. But the other important factor from a biomarker is it gives us a clue again to a pathway that's deranged. If there's a biomarker that appears in the blood uniquely of lipedema patients, which we think we've identified, then that means that some pathway is being activated that isn't typically activated in normal people that don't have lipedema. And we don't see this biomarker either in lymphedema or in obesity. So it is, we think, unique to lipedema.
Really?
Well, yeah,
that's
but I mean that's
pretty darn exciting.
Well, it is. I mean, there are many slips between, an observation and its validation and publication. But we're excited. We're zeroing in on the final phases of this, and that may help all of us. So those are the kinds of studies that are needed. I think what is not going to happen is a variety of shotgun, or shouldn't happen, let's say. I think there are some, I call it lipedema specialists, who are using more of the shotgun approach of, gee, lipedema looks like that, and that is treated with X, so let's try X in lipedema. Oh, well, lipedema has this attribute, and other people who have that attribute get Y from their doctor, so let's try Y. I don't think that's going to succeed. And I think that opens up the door to a lot of potential harm as well. I think we need to approach it in a mechanistic way. But I think these are the kinds of mechanistic studies that I think will be fruitful. And then along the way, if somebody can figure out a way to create an animal model, I mean, for example, if our biomarker work helps us understand what pathway we're interested in, and then we could, intervene in a molecular way to replicate, an animal that basically makes the same biomarker because of what we've done to it, then we have a model in which we can begin to explore mechanisms. A lot you can do in animals that you can't do in people until you are pretty sure you know what you're doing. So that's where the field needs to go. I think, though, that the activism step, the education step, these are all very important because it creates a certain impetus to do the work that otherwise doesn't exist.
Mhm. Mhm. I had read a little bit about your research on LTB4.
Yes.
I made a note to myself about that, but I have to confess I don't actually remember what it is. Can you elaborate a little bit and tell me if you think it will have an impact on your lipedema work, or if this is purely a lymphedema thing?
Well, that was what I was alluding to earlier with the drug trial that we've just concluded, but haven't finished analyzing.
That's the drug trial.
Yeah, so the drug that we're testing is a specific drug that blocks the body's production of that molecule. That molecule is an inflammatory mediator. Its full name is leukotriene B4, and it is active in a variety of processes in the body that relate to disease, but we found this very unique association with the kind of like what I keep calling the fingerprint of the specific inflammation that we see in the tissues in lymphedema. And so we have tested this drug in this first clinical trial of about 55 patients, a placebo-controlled trial, and I'm sure we'll be announcing preliminary results sometime this fall. As I say, the brand or the fingerprint of inflammation in lipedema may be very different than leukotriene before related, because I think the adipocyte is so heavily, I think is the source of the inflammation in lipedema, whereas in lymphedema, I think the primary source of the inflammation is in the tissue itself, the non fat derived tissue. But we know that diabetes, for example, has a heavy expression of LTB4, and we know that in diabetes the visceral fat cells are also inflamed. Now again, the inflammation may have a different character in diabetes than it does in lipedema. These are all unknowns because we just don't have the insight to know how they're the same or different.
Okay, a couple of more sort of nitty-gritty-ish questions. What percentage of your patients do you think have lipedema? And I've heard so many statistics floating around, and I'm wondering what is your estimate of how many women in the general population actually have lipedema?
So that's a difficult question to answer for a couple of reasons, 2 or 3. The most difficult part of it is that my clinic is a little bit like a stocked pond, that you go pay so you can, fish trout out of it or whatever. Because the patients come to me literally from all over the U.S. because they know I have an expertise in this area, and there was a story on NPR last year and so on, and so my clinic doesn't even represent a sampling of the general edema population. It is enriched by the lipedema cohort. So I see in a given, I basically spend about 20 hours a week in the clinic setting where I see patients, and I easily see 2 to 4 lipedema patients a week in that setting. So of maybe 20, so by those numbers, that would represent 20% of the population, which is a vast overestimate. But I also think that the number that is often thrown out there, and I don't remember exactly where it came from, somebody has said it's 11% of the population. I think that's a gross overestimate. I think that number may have come from Ethel Saldy is the weird thing. Yeah, it might have. And they've had a long interest in lipedema, and I think that having been to their clinic, I know that there's a lot of adiposity and obesity mixed in with their population, and I don't, again, because we don't have any, it would be as if I looked at people walking into the door and at the end of looking at them, I said, well, I think 10% of my female patients have breast cancer. It's not based on it shouldn't be just based on what they look like. And unfortunately, that's what we're left with. It's a little easier to make the diagnosis definitively if there's a disproportion between the affected limbs and the trunk. But in the German population that I saw over there, that's often not the case, even when they have lipedema. So there's a lot of central obesity that coexists
layered
with lipedema.
On top. Yeah.
And so it makes it hard to say this person does or doesn't. I know that the inclusion criteria for the genetic analysis of the family studies is they have to